It's very hard. That's very hard for me.
Hey, we're live.
Hello.
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 Hi, everybody. Good to see you.
Hello
to
to
see
the
you
world.
too.
I should say hello as well.
Hello, Robin.
Hello,
Good
Robin.
evening. Goedenavond.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Joachim.
Hi. Hi,
Hey,
everybody.
Tony.
Fancy seeing you here.
So I can touch LA. I can do this if my hand
Oh,
comes.
wow.
I was hoping it might go through.
Yeah, yeah.
No. Look.
Oh,
Tony,
yeah.
we should do a high five as well.
Yeah. Oh, no, wrong
Difficult.
way.
Yeah.
It's so confusing.
Very good.
Is this how the Brady Bunch starts?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It is the brain. Excellent.
I can bust out some of my mime moves. I've been learning mime during. No, I haven't actually. That's a lie. Sorry.
Oh,
Some
we'll
friends
be excited.
dropping in to say hi. Robin is here. Hey, Robin. People from the Discord server. Hello.
Friend from New Zealand. Empty vessel. Greg from
Yeah.
New Zealand.
Ah,
Yeah. How's it going?
Good day, mate.
chili.
We can just spend our time staring at this.
Yeah. Why not?
It's fine by me.
I can only do one thing at a time, so I can't look at the comments. It's too confusing.
Oh,
yeah,
hey,
It is
Pablo.
overwhelming.
It is confusing. So how is everyone doing, considering the state of the world and everything?
What's happened? Did I miss something?
Actually, thank you, Robin, for sending me your album, An Ascent. I really enjoyed
Thank you.
listening to it.
Yeah,
That was,
happened actually. That happened
recent,
because
right?
of the that happened because of the pandemic. It comes out on this isn't a sales plug, but it comes out this week. But in a sense, the record wouldn't have happened if it were not for the pandemic. In a sense, I was meant to be playing a show in Bristol at this thing called Machina Bristronica with some amazing artists, and I was really excited, and it got cancelled, as did everybody's live shows. And I thought, why don't I just perform on the same day I was meant to be performing at the same time on that Saturday to more people, because more people would see it online than they would, come to the show itself. And I sorted it out on YouTube, managed to understand all the technicalities, because you have to learn very quickly how these things work. And then a guy called Ian, who runs a label called Din, D-I-N, in the UK, heard it and thought it was a great live set and said, could you make something similar? And I had all the gear still set up in the studio for the live show. And I just literally recorded 90 minutes of music. And it became this very kind of live cinematic modular album. There's nothing else on there but a modular synth and a digitac and a little drum machine, and that's it. And I feel it came together quite well. You've heard it. You seem to enjoy it. So
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I thought, you say it was done with mostly modular gear. There are some sounds in there which remind me of acoustic instruments or even field recordings. Is that something?
Yeah. I was using this thing called Wave by Qubit Electronics, which is a sampler. And so every now and then I would randomly throw in recordings of voices, poetry readings. I have a recording of Chernobyl just after the terrible incident. I have a recording of all the landscape for about 30 minutes with rainfall and everything. And I just use those within the piece itself. And what I do is I don't know what's on those reels, so to speak. I have hundreds of samples in there, and I just randomly press buttons and hope that whatever comes through
Nice.
makes some kind of sense.
Yeah. Like you used to do with tuning
Exactly.
frequency bands. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tony kind of identifies with this as well, which is an idea that when you perform, and maybe Ben as well, but it's not always about the finished product. It's not always about setting things in squares and shapes and building the structure. It's dealing with the moment. It's dealing with that level of improvisation and the surprise element. And I think what always appealed to me about all this stuff, this modular stuff, is it's not the screen, and I can't always control it. I can set something up. I can return to it the next day, and it does something quite different. And in fact, sometimes the quite different can be an improvement on what it did before. Electricity is a wonderful thing in some sense. The voltages change, it seems, and settings change. I don't save things either. So when I finish, I pull all the cables out of these machines, and I don't save anything. So I can't repeat it. So it's a dangerous thing, but it's about the moment, really.
It's a method that where you can allow the magic to manifest itself more easily somehow with this kind of it's just injecting more chaos into it, isn't it?
And also because you can't anticipate the next moment, in a sense. Surprise is going to happen. And so when there's a video of me performing online on my YouTube channel in March. I don't know what's happening after the first 3 minutes. I have no idea where it's going. And it ends up in this kind of rhythmic, it's like a rock rolling down the hill, and it picks up all the moss and grass and everything as it reaches the bottom. And this thing builds and builds in tension. That's what I love about it.
How do you feel? This is a sort of a general question to everyone, I guess, but how do you feel about mistakes or correcting them, or, making something perfect, or going back and editing and working, or is that just part of it?
I like mistakes, if I can speak first there. Sometimes, what I used to always do with records, I do it every now and then now, but what I used to always do was when I finished a record and I'd cleaned everything up and it was kind of finished, I'd then put a mic out of the window. And so in the final mix that goes to DAT, which was the master at the time, there'd always be this element of surprise and chaos and what one might call a mistake, because you never knew what it was going to be. And all I would do was ride the channel and see what was there. But I think, mistakes can teach you a lot as well, not only with music, but in life. We learn through mistakes. And it depends the kind of work you're doing. If you're doing commercial work, you're doing a work for a film or television or a dance company or theatre, you have to tidy things up. You have to clear out some of the mistakes. But in other situations, it's beautiful, I find.
It depends on what you call a mistake, even. You can purposely do things that cause mistakes and then kind of ride the wave of whatever is happening. I have a bunch of things that I sometimes do to purposely cause something to go wrong or go in an unexpected direction. Like, for example, I sometimes have the tempo of my DAW on a fader, on a MIDI fader, and I just yank it and see, or I spin it and see where it ends up, and then just go with the tempo. That is just comes up. Or I have there's also a sequencer or a clock device that I use that does half time and double time and swing and stuff, 4-channel clock. And when I've done a recording, a jam, I just yank all the knobs that do different things with the sync and the tempo and double time, half time. And sometimes you get, depending on the machines they're running, you get totally unexpected results, which can turn into something completely new. So it's not really a mistake, but it's doing something on purpose which you do not know the outcome of, and then you try to interact with it or try to save it or to rescue it, which could end up in another interesting thing.
I think a lot of the time I'm probably too impatient to tidy things up so much. So that's probably where it gets, I leave it a little rough because, but I definitely know that there are times when I spent too long on a project and kind of squeezed the life out of it. So it's like a balance. But I think a lot of the time it's because I'm impatient that I leave things a little bit rough. How about you, Ben?
I oscillate pretty heavily between situations where I guess I have less control and then wanting extreme control over every aspect. Like, for instance, when I made 1979, which was a couple years ago, that was an ambient album that I recorded all directly to cassette tape. And I was working a lot I was scoring a lot. I was working long hours on other projects, and it was kind of my way to unwind at the end of the day. So I would set up my DAW, set up very simple arrangements, not a ton of, I would just have a couple of elements and I would sort of ride them and play them. And then that was it. And I would record it directly to a cassette tape. And I would come back and listen to it, and over the and sometimes a song would be an evening, it would come together. Sometimes a song would be 3 nights, but matter of hours. And I would come back to that, and then I at various points I tried to make that better, and I just kept making it worse, worse and worse and worse. And I concluded that's what that project wanted. It was just very simple, recorded simply, and that was sort of like the heart of it. But then every album that I've done since that, or that I'm working on now, even, I've ended up spending over a year building these really complex max patches and really intense like DSP projects that take me the whole year to develop this thing. And it becomes this thing about like really needing to have sort of as much control, compositional control as possible. And I think that's just what interests me at that time. I just follow my interests, and that's where it's taking me. But I have had the thought that like sometimes our most successful music that like resonates the most with people, or even with ourselves, is sometimes that stuff that comes together very quickly, that you just kind of are letting it flow out and writing music. But I struggle with that idea.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to go through that whole process of discovering new techniques, new approaches, doing all this, going through all the depths and frustrations of building something that you have in your head or want to achieve, to finally realize that the simple things can be very interesting as well, and even survive time better than the most thought out ideas. The things that come together quick, the things that come together quick or intuitively are usually when you are not really thinking about what you're doing. The more, the less you know what you are doing, the better the results will be, because it's sort of like an unconscious thing that happens rather than something that is completely overthought. And what about you guys?
Oh, sorry, just real quick.
Yeah,
I was thinking about this morning when I was thinking about coming on the stream, in that sometimes what really interests me to start a project and to want to explore a project is a process. And sometimes it's just writing music. And, for like 1979, I was just writing music. I was just, here I am, I'm going to write some music, I'm going to record it, and there it is. And now I'm on these projects where it's what interests me is like the process, the conceptual idea, and the process of how I'm going to write the music that is really interesting to me. I'm just curious if you guys have ever heard about that.
What's interesting? What I was going to say, what's interesting for me actually is that kind of process, which is that when you're working on something and you enter a moment of struggle, when you've spent hours and hours, and by the end of the day, you think this really hasn't gone the direction I anticipated it going. When you're actually working towards a structure, what I've often found is I just literally do a save as, I delete everything. I have all my sound sources already there. I've chosen particular sounds, I've made various sounds, and I kind of recreate it in 1 hour. So I may have spent 8 hours trying to get to this place. I haven't arrived there. It's if I took the wrong bus or something, or the train broke down. Mostly my brain broke down. And what I tend to do is remake it in that hour. And quite often, that hour-long version is much more successful because, as Joachim said, it's a little bit like you've worked through the process. You've kind of mixed all those during the day. You understand where this should be going. But in fact, you've got lost in the kind of structure of it. You're like building this big building and you're lost in all the floors. And sometimes it's better just to demolish it and build it again, because you know how to build it within that 1 hour. And actually that 1 hour can be the most successful thing, but you had to invest all the other hours to get to that 1 hour. Of course, that's
a very disciplined way of working, Robin. I wouldn't have the the patience of recreating something. I actually think recreating something is a lot harder than just throwing things out on the fly.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by
starting a new track is easier than trying to rescue something that hasn't been giving you the sparks.
But I'm always fascinated. Sorry, Tony. You can...
Oh yeah, I was going to say I kind of what you're saying resonates with me, but the way that works for me is, if I've reached a dead end with a project, I'll save it and I'll come back to it next week, and then what it needs or what's wrong with it will be much more apparent to me. So yeah, but your approaches are much much more disciplined and patient. And yeah, I definitely, I try to use impatience to my advantage. But yeah, I've definitely over, more recently actually, I've noticed how a lot of ways I work are basically down to being impatient.
And do you just going back to that question, do you just sit down to write music, or do you sit down with the thought like, oh, I want to explore this technique, or I want to explore this piece of gear, or
you were saying about, I identify with what you're saying about some, and I think we've said about this before with Joachim about sometimes you're exploring a process and other times you're writing music, and sometimes that kind of, I don't know, that overlaps, and it can kind of change along the way.
I suppose it also depends upon what manner of work you're doing at any moment. If somebody's invited you to make a record, for example, there's let's use inverted commas, the discipline of entering a space, a studio, and beginning to work and working through these ideas. There's other times I work a lot with contemporary dance. So I've written now over 65 pieces for dance companies. That's ballet and solo artists, all kinds of things all over the world. And that's always a strange thing, because I receive an email usually that says we need 20 minutes of music. And I will say, what kind of mood are we looking for? What kind of structure? And so often they will say, well, you decide. And then I have to sit down and make this shape and send it off, hoping that they're going to write back and say, this is fantastic, but could it be a bit faster here? Could it be a bit slower? And that way I have to have a very disciplined way of working. Other times what I've discovered is I just get a piece of gear, and the first time I play with it suddenly leads me in a very different direction, or I watch a tutorial about it, so I learn how it actually works, and I discover a whole new revelation of this thing I've had actually does this thing. And that can lead me in a very different direction. So sometimes I'm actually led by the technology itself to take me on a particular route.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've discovered throughout the years ways of forcing things to happen. So if you, for example, the simplest things, like restricting your setup, just pick a small amount of pieces of gear and just use that as your instrument, and don't get tempted to grab something else if you get stuck for 5 minutes or whatever, and just focus all on this one little setup or chain of instruments or whatever, and that will be my thing for the entire day. And I've never failed to get something out of it if that's the rule I set to myself. So and there's all kinds of other ways too, but the things you can do to create circumstances in which things happen, I think are underestimated. The circumstances in which you work or the circumstances, I mean what you allow yourself to use, or the rules you set for yourself. It can be, they're not rules that are can be that you need to think about as something that is restrictive, but more like focusing your thoughts. I find that very helpful sometimes.
I think restrictions are really important in some sense, actually. I think there's a danger today when we can have hundreds of plugins. I mean, you can boot up your DAW and I see it load and it says, I'm just loading 200 of plugins, and you think, this is absurd. I'm going to use one of those probably. So every now and then I actually go through them and just delete them. I bought them. They sit on my hard drive. I can reinstall them if I want to. But I was going to say that two of my favorite videos I've watched on YouTube are Tony's videos, actually. Those ones where you're talking through your gear. And I really love it in a very simple way. There's one kind of more ambient setup, and there's one more kind of techno setup.
Oh, the thing for RA, wasn't it, I think?
Was that what it was? And they're great videos. I mean, I think they're really inspiring for a lot of people, because they very immediately say, I'm using 3 pieces of gear here.
Oh, yeah.
And they work. And that's all I needed to make this magic happen. I remember when I saw you live at the Purcell Room, maybe 5 or 6 years ago in London at the Royal Festival Hall.
Oh, yeah.
And you did a show there. it was a beautiful show. And I think that was literally just 1 or 2 machines. It was something like a
it was
a
music easel and a looper.
Yeah. And it was fantastic. And that's all it needed in a way. And actually, it was that reductive quality, less restrictions. It was more about reduction. It was realizing that you can tell the story, the bare bones of the story. That's all it needs to do. And actually, then you embrace that space. And it actually gives you space to breathe. That's the other thing. And I think you can actually be daunted with a situation, especially even if you're just using software, that you stare at it and think, I could go anywhere, but I don't know where to go because I have too many possibilities.
I've definitely seen people do techno live shows, and they're having a terrible time because they've got this table full of gear, and they're desperately trying to stay in control of it. And I understand the mindset behind it. It's like, it feels like you're creating safety nets by having more gear there. But really, it's impossible for one human to kind of control all that stuff. And in a permanent state, a panic attack.
Yeah.
And it's just like oh God, horrible.
It's like with every other instrument. The more you know your instrument well, the better you're going to be performing on it.
But as somebody comments here, it's quite interesting actually. Somebody says, I like how Scanner is saying that with 20U of Modular behind him. I think, but the point I'm trying to make, I think what's interesting is, how often do you watch a chef on a TV show stand in their kitchen and they're surrounded by all the tools of their trade, all the possible herbs, but they don't use all those herbs.
Yeah, all they do is put this basil leaf there. That's your
exactly. Yeah, and that's the most important point. I know, because people often bring this up, and I know they're being cheeky about this, but I think it's an important point to make, which is you don't use everything. You may have a wardrobe full of your clothes, but you don't wear every shirt and jumper and pair of trousers at the same time. Maybe you do. It's a great style. It's a great statement to make. But I think what I'm trying to say, and I think people hopefully understand this, is it's about making those decisions with the choice of things you have. When I perform live, I have one small 6U modular case. That's it. That's all I have. And that's all I need for it. In fact, it's too much. I can do it with a kind of half size of that, a 3U. But, I think it's important to remember that analogy with the chef is playful, but it's quite important. The chef doesn't use everything in the kitchen. Any work person doesn't use every tool they have in their truck or their van. They use the tool for the job. And I think that's what's important to remember.
Yeah.
I sound like a school teacher there. I didn't mean it to sound like that.
It makes you think. I remember, when I started out making techno, it was like hardware gear, and it felt really liberating to move to using a Logic audio and having this kind of multi-tracking audio and be able, I basically started working with audio in the computer, and it was really liberating because, before that there were so many ideas I had that I just couldn't do. Things weren't stable enough or whatever. But then, I got into that computer world, and then I got really bogged down with that. And then, there was a point where I kind of came out of that and became connected more with hardware again. And now the sort of combination of the two, I find really, really fun, as long as I keep a perspective. But it's also realizing the power of restriction and simplicity, like you were saying, Robin. It's limiting myself to a few pieces of gear or something like that, and realizing, actually, maybe that's why those early tracks work really well, because I had to work really hard with some terrible gear and be really inventive with bad, limited equipment, instead of having this sea of billions of plugins and presets and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of funny having this kind of full circle thing, I don't know, 25 years later or something. It's like, oh yeah.
But isn't it also something, that doesn't have to do with the stuff you imagine yourself of being able to do with the stuff that you've got on your at your fingertips, right? I mean, I'm not phrasing this well, but if you have a few pieces of gear, or like you said, it's restricted or limited or crappy or whatever, I don't think you can still have a very clear, focused idea where you want to go with it, and it makes you work harder. But to be honest, I don't feel any difference in whether I have a lot of stuff to work with, a lot of gear to work with, or just a very small amount of gear to work with. The idea what I want to do is pretty much all the same, and it's just okay. Now I've got this to my disposal. I'll figure out how I can get where I want to go. You know what I mean? It's it doesn't really. Yeah, I mean, do you know what I mean, or is it a bit convoluted what I'm saying? I mean it's. Yeah, what I guess what I'm saying is whatever you, I'm sure it's true for all of us. Whatever you give us, there's always something you can get out of it. You can imagine what you can do with it.
Well, I think you can easily look at the analogy of a pianist, and I think the piano is an instrument that's been around for so long, and yet people can still write unique, original music on this device.
Yeah. You're now saying in 5 words what I tried to say.
Yeah,
for 50.
But people, taught themselves to explore the technique of using the instrument. And I think to me, what is really quite stunning still about music to me is the fact that we've been making this stuff for so long. Music, not only with technology, long before electricity was around. But we still have original voices within this field. And I still find that absolutely amazing that people can use the same tools. A rock band can use guitars and drums and bass, but you recognize within a moment, if a track comes on the radio, you can recognize whether that's the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or Radiohead by the shape and style and color and technique and everything in these pieces. To me, that's quite magical. Whether you like these bands or not doesn't matter. But I think what fascinates me about production within music is that signature style.
Yeah, signature. Yeah.
And so, the signature, like with the piano, is really interesting. You had pianists in the last century, everyone from Henry Cowell, who made this amazing piece of music where he basically hammered on the piano just before John Cage made the prepared piano, but took an instrument that everybody was familiar with, but took it into a whole new world. So this piano, which was previously playing beautiful tunes and melodies, suddenly became this incredible percussive instrument. And I think, that's what's really unique about it. And then people started doing it with the guitar and making kind of prepared guitars and processing them through different amplifiers. And when pedals came into kind of that word, guitar pedals, in the same way we talk about synthesizers and electrical instruments like that, there's a whole world of people who are completely fanatical about guitar pedals. I heard a story recently about someone. He said that he was selling his pedals and he'd sold 400 of them, but that's about a third of his collection. And he bought 10 of each pedal. And you think maybe a backup, if you're on tour or something, would be quite useful if you're in a big band, but 10 of everything? I'm not sure where you're going to go with this unless you're building some great art sculpture in your house. In fact, do you have the space to have that many? I don't know. But the signature thing is really important. I think it's something that all of us would recognize, the idea of not deliberately looking for a signature sound, but developing your voice as the years progress, and you find yourself in a way. Do you not have that? Do you not? Yeah, it
definitely appeals to collectors, the pedal and the modular thing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, modular is as much a shopping culture as it is a music making culture, for sure.
My favorite thing, I say it to one of my best friends, I always say, the thing that strikes me about the modular world is the amount of people that put modules for sale secondhand online and say, use this for 1 hour, use this for 2 hours, still sealed. And you think, really? You gave up on it after 2 hours? You gave up on it after an hour? It's still sealed? I mean, at the moment, perhaps somebody bought it and then realized they lost their job or something like that. So it's difficult to judge. But for me, for some years, I've noticed that people buy things and I see them advertise this new product coming out, and then I see everybody selling them again. You think, wow, that's a strange situation. That kind of things need an investment at times, your own investment in terms of learning something and seeing what it can actually offer you, I think.
I would assume that was the problem is when people create an idea about something and then they receive this module and it's not what they imagined it to be, and instead of like experiencing what it is and enjoying what it is and working with what it is, it's kind of disrupted their mental image of it. So that's why they're immediately disappointed by it and then sell it. It's like they haven't even had a chance to enjoy it.
But also these things take an investment of your time. I mean, you need to learn how to use them. You can buy a very simple guitar pedal and then discover that even through just like a reverb in a particular setting, this thing can be extraordinary. The great thing today is we have a thing called YouTube and other places where you can actually see people demonstrating this, and you realize actually the potential of some of these things that you may otherwise have dismissed. And hence you have that whole kind of climate of people suddenly discovering a guitar pedal from 20 years ago that everybody dismissed and you can still buy for $20 almost. And then everybody thinks, I better get it quick because it's going to suddenly go up on all the markets. Everybody's going to want this incredibly cheap but very versatile pedal. That happens.
It's strange with YouTube demos though, because there can be some amazing bits of gear that aren't
demoed really badly.
Yeah, that's the thing, and it's difficult. I think it can be difficult to. I mean, it's there's definitely useful things about kind of techniques on YouTube, but yeah, demoing new gear, it can be difficult to figure out, or like a module or something. Sometimes it can be difficult to figure out, am I actually going to like that? And just because everyone uses the same piece of gear in such different ways.
I find that my desire for new gear is inversely proportional to my creative satisfaction. So if I'm on a project and it's all going great and it's gelling, I'm like, I have everything I need. I don't need anything ever again. And the second I'm like, the second that starts dipping down, it's like, let's go on YouTube. Let's see. Ooh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, dangerous.
I just thought, and it's true. You don't need all this stuff. But there are those times when it can spark a new direction or
absolutely.
a new territory. But I do find that when I'm happiest, I don't sort of lust after things. It's a lust. It is shopping culture as well. It's like you want that quick satisfaction.
Yeah, but there's also something like what you said about getting a new piece of gear doesn't always mean that it's you acquire it to rescue you from a less creative period or whatever, but it can also be a challenge, taking on a new journey to really discover something new and go to use your mind in a different way, because this piece of gear was designed in a different way. It asks for a different relationship with it or something. It could give you some new ideas and new insights, and just the joy of going down a rabbit hole with a new piece of gear can be amazing and very inspiring.
Can we?
Oh yeah, carry on, Ben.
I was going to say, can we talk about how powerful tools are these days? It continually blows me away how powerful things are now. And it occurred to me the other day that I could spend a lifetime exploring and discovering new things in a free open source piece of software like SuperCloud or C-Sound or PD or whatever for the rest of my life, as long as like my mental as long as I thought about it the right way and continued to explore it the right way. Like each tool is it's almost endless now. I know that sounds silly, but like there are so many embedded powerful DSP things in Modular, or incredibly powerful VSTs and DAWs. I mean, or these like, DSP sort of open-ended programming platforms that it's crazy to me now how different it is, like from 15, 20 years ago.
Are you a good programmer, Ben? I'm curious.
I mean, I've been using Max MSP for 15, 16, 17 years or something.
Okay.
And I've been getting in, and I've messed around with Super Collider for that. I'm not like I don't know anything about traditional programming. And in fact, I almost ordered like a programming for dummies book the other day because like I truly don't understand sort of the high level, like above the forest view of all of the different programming languages. But I've been getting more and more into it. I've been learning this thing called Tidal cycles and a couple other live coding languages for, one of them is for Max MSP. It's called Jibberwocky. There's this other one called Opus Modus. These are all
just making these up, are you? You're not just inventing names, are you?
They're horrible names.
Actually,
but they're still powerful. This is kind of the control I was talking about. Like I do lust for this kind of like low level control often.
Can you explain the tidal sequencing and the tidal cycle stuff that you're talking about? Because we had Richard Devine on a few weeks ago, and he was talking about that as well. I don't think that's something that's very well known by a lot of people. So what does it do?
Yeah, tidal cycles. It's a live coding language, which is a whole sort of subgenre of electronic music and coding. So it's live coding languages about manipulating the text in real time. So they're very sort of concise. You don't have to type a lot, and it's all about manipulating the text as you're performing. So the performance is how you're manipulating the text in general. You can also use them as studio tools in a more linear fashion, but in general, they're about real-time manipulation. And so Tidal Cycles is a program that's written in Haskell, which I didn't really know anything about until this, and it communicates via OSC defaulted to Super Collider, and Super Collider is the synth and sample engine, but you could switch that to anything that accepts OSC. What's interesting about Tidal Cycles is that it's all about pattern, and it has this this method or philosophy, I don't know what you would call it, of a cycle. So you can think of it as a circle. Circle is one cycle. So if you add two events, you could think you have half notes. They're at this point, these 2 points in the circle. Then if you add three, everything is always relational. It's a rational number, I guess. So then you have thirds. If you add five, then you have five things in this cycle. So the events speed up. So that's unlike most sequencers, where if you have four half notes and you just say, I want 5 half notes, the half notes don't get shorter. The sequence gets longer. But in this, they all smush together. So there are ways around that, but what happens is you end up with a system that is very easy to generate complex rhythm sequences that are unlike other sequencers. And added to that,
Foreman asks, isn't that Euclidean sequencing, or what is the difference?
It has Euclidean sequencing, and that is a good description of Euclidean sequencing. But there are so many ways. So Euclidean sequencing will always have even distributions of the events. In Tidal Cycles, you could say the second event, I want 6 events to happen, and those will all squish into that second event. And you can continue and modify the sequences like that. And then you also get away from linear sequencing in that you have these sort of text-based modifications. So you could say every third cycle, reverse it, or every third cycle, rotate it, or every third cycle, switch sequences entirely. Or you could have these overlapping sequences. So this one is, 5 long, and this one is 12 long with the division of modulo of 12, and this one, you can end up with these very complex sequences.
I want to hear it now.
Yeah, it's fun, man. It would be very, very hard to linearly make. So you could do it, but it's like you just won't, because it would be such a complex thing to try to figure out. So what's interesting about it is you just end up with very complex, with a very short amount of code. Once you learn it, it's very, very hard to learn, I gotta say. I'm really into it.
It's really hurting my brain right now.
I know.
Yeah. So
I know.
so did it give you the results you wanted from it? Did you get any?
That's what
did
I wanted
you?
to
So-
ask. Yeah.
Yeah, so this has been sort of my quarantine project. You know, like when the quarantine hit, I just kind of went full in on this. And so I've been learning for probably 3 months now, and it's starting to sort of gel. But I think I need another month or two before I really can flow with it. But it's allowing me. The reason I got into it is that, you know, I came from being a hip hop DJ. Underground hip hop was the first music that I loved, and then I started making, you know, then I got an MPC and I was making hip hop instrumentals, you know, just hip hop inspired beats. So then my first 3 albums, I think, are basically that. They're like dark textural hip hop inspired downbeat electronic music. Then I've since 1979, I've really gotten away from drums and from rhythm. And I think partially is that when I go, if you gave me some pads or a keyboard or a sequencer, I default to certain rhythms that I know and that I grew up listening to.
Okay.
And I think I've become a little bored with that. So I'm trying to figure out a way to bring rhythm back into my music that is interesting to me.
That makes
so
sense.
In that way, it has worked. It's just now, you know, it's like you were talking about with all the tools. You are able to create immense amount of complexity very, very quickly. And now it's really about limiting that and saying, okay, like, here's my pattern. I'm just going to do one thing, and that's the whole piece of music. Because I'm running into this problem where, like, it's so powerful, but doesn't mean that you should do it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should do all of that. So really, it's now about me learning these little. It's like a whole universe, and you're just saying, I just want to live here in this one little star over here and explore it, and then maybe I'll move over here and explore it, and just kind of ignore all this other stuff until you're ready to explore that. But it's happening. It's happening.
Cool.
I mean,
you know, things like this, learning things like this. It's being in the studio, trying to get your head around things like this is never wasted time. It'll always teach you something that you might be able to use in a different context or later on, or even get, you know, or even finally master it. So you can actually use it all the time. But sometimes the time you are not really committing something to tape, as it were, but still spend your time learning, I don't think it's ever really wasted. Do you?
I'm always intrigued by this idea of mastering, though. I'm always intrigued by the idea of mastering.
Well, mastering. I mean, what I mean by that is being fluid on something. You know,
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a term I'm used to from classical music and everything, where people talk about mastering the violin and this kind of thing. And I'm always intrigued by it because I say to myself quite frequently, I say, I really want to master this instrument, this piece of gear. I don't think I've never done that with anything I've got, in a way. And I think I've started getting interested in even more reductive technology, in a way. And this isn't no disrespect to software and Ben's, you know, beautiful description of what this can do, but I find myself intrigued by very basic instruments, in a sense. I picked up recently these tiny synths made by an American company called Elytone. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. They're tiny little things, and you use little cables and you move between them, and you never quite know what you're doing, and even the pressure of your fingers on them changes them. And I like them because there's no way you could ever, and I only use this term now, master, there's no way you could ever really learn how it works, because there are so many configurations, again, like software in a sense. There are so many ways that you could patch this one tiny little instrument that I could never know what it's going to do. And I'm actually really enjoying that at the moment. I mean, I think, you know, what Ben's saying in some sense is interesting as well, which is that he's one of the few people who wants lockdown to continue. So he can master, he can finally really, you know, champion this software. And I think, you know, it's an interesting thing, the joke for a lot of us, I think, or the remark lots of people made at the beginning of sort of February, March was, in lockdown, I've been like this for X amount of years, because so many people work on their own. I think what it's offered a lot of people is time which hasn't been spent either traveling or meeting deadlines, receiving almost zero income on the other side of things, which doesn't quite balance so well. But, I've been trying to embrace it as well in a positive way and learn things and read manuals and play with things and try and champion them, to see what they can actually do. It's a tricky one. I mean, I'm intrigued by software, but, my eyes didn't exactly glaze over, but I thought, I'm not sure I can really learn this.
I really, I have a great admiration for people who can get so deep into the programming, like, the Auteca guys and this kind of a programming approach. But I very early on realized that however much I'd like to be, I'm not a programmer. It's just not how my head works. And like what Robin said about gear, I've been really enjoying exploring gear, maybe which is kind of slightly influenced by the idea of like the okay, now I can't think of it. What's the thing that you kind of go
Theremin.
Exactly. Yeah, that one.
I had no idea. I was totally lost.
Yeah. The theremin, and like the Russian guys, Soma, they seem, I've read they're really influenced by theremin, and they make all this gear which is, I actually secretly love that it frustrates a lot of people so much, because it's so, you can't control it, it's untamable, you can't tune it very well, but it reacts to you play it in a much more physical way. And that's, I guess maybe with quite a lot of electronic musicians, they're not so used to interacting in such a subtle and physical way with the gear. So that's been a lot of fun. And the gear that Robin was talking about, that sounds fun as well, where, you have to, there's something about it that you have to give up the control, like you have to kind of submit to it somehow.
You kind of
and that can be really fun.
Yeah,
it's difficult.
I got a few pieces made by Folk Tech. They're from Portland, and one of them has strings sticking out and some parallel effect processors, and it's really a performance instrument. But you never know what it's going to do. You can kind of predict it, but you have to move really slowly and kind of go along with whatever it's doing. But because there's never a way that you can completely control it, so I like to be on sort of the edge of sort of riding the wave where the instrument takes you, and still manipulating it in a way that you end up in different territories. There's another one called mescaline, which is also very.
I have this,
I've got it too. It's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, nice.
And you can never. I mean, you can understand what it does to a certain extent, but you never completely are able to predict what is coming out.
It's funny, I have a video on my YouTube channel using the mescaline, and one of the first comments somebody made was, it can be musical as well. And it's such a beautiful, I made this very simple, very melancholic kind of slow motion ambient piece with it almost immediately. It wasn't that difficult to do, and I'm not that knowledgeable about it, but I just, I was actually playing it with my fingers and also moving whatever those cables are called, those funny cables it uses. I'm not sure what the term of those.
They're breadboard cable.
Breadboard cables.
Yeah.
And literally, I was just plugging them in through a reverb, and this thing was just floating through space. And actually, it turned out beautiful. But what I noticed after that person mentioned this, I went back online and I saw that so many videos I watched of this instrument were kind of chaos, which is beautiful in itself, but wasn't what I was looking for, but you can control the beast. But I think, Tony used the word as well, I think, which is organic about some of these instruments. What I really love about them is they actually feel like you're playing an instrument. I'm not sure if you play instruments. I mean, I studied the piano when I was a very young boy, when I was sort of 9 and 10, stopped by about the age of 12 because my mother couldn't afford the piano lessons, which were 50 pence. So that was the end of my musical career. And then I taught myself the guitar. So the guitar is the only thing I can really play. And I still like the physicality. I still like the physical relationship of my fingers to a board, touching these strings, and that kind of very organic character of it. And it's something I've always longed for in instruments. And I'm still in both a love affair with electricity, as in software and music, but also hardware. I love the two, actually. And I can't really choose between the two. I slip between them at times. Sometimes I think I'm really enjoying this, and then I discover a piece of software and think, wow, this has really opened up my mind into what I could actually do with this. And I think, it's going back to the point that Ben made, which is that we are at an extraordinary time of possibilities. And I think that's the key word. There are so many possibilities with what we have today, and again, it's about reining those in to what you want those things to do and being able to control them in some way.
Yeah, I also find that I kind of like the feeling of being lost in the woods and needing to find your way home, and I don't and sometimes this actually is a question for everybody. Sometimes that experience is not fun at all. It's hard. It's challenge. It's struggle, and it's a lot of things that aren't working to get to one that does feel like it's working. But I've heard a lot of you mention sort of play, and a lot of my process does not feel playful. Oh. It feels challenging, and I kind of like that. I don't know what that says about me, but I do. I like feeling like I'm in over my head, and I have to swim pretty hard to get back to the surface, and because it feels like that's when I'm really growing in a way. And again, it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning. That doesn't necessarily relate to the music. That doesn't mean I'm just writing music, but learning in terms of broadening my skills and therefore the possibilities of what I can make in the future.
Are you using us as your therapist here? You don't want to pay a therapist.
Yeah.
I just realized.
I know.
We should be lying on a couch.
I do this for everyone. Don't feel special.
Yeah. I was going to say I've in the past I've played around with Super Collider, but it was quite a long time ago. Maybe like 15-ish years ago, but I would essentially take existing code and just kind of mess around with it and use my own samples or whatever like that. And I actually did at Birmingham University. There was like a summer school, a Super Collider summer school, and whoever I don't know wrote the thing, he was actually
James McCartney.
Yeah, that was it. And he actually hosted this summer school, and it was just so over my head. And I was like buying C for Dummies to try, because isn't it close to C, the language, or have I got that completely wrong?
I think
like Super Collider is kind of based on C or something. I don't know. Maybe that's where I went completely wrong, but yeah, I really tried to get into it, but it's just like, I don't know. That's like I say, I have a lot of admiration for people who can get their head around that stuff, but it's just, it's just not. Well, it's just not for me. It's not my aptitude.
There are plenty of people who can, but it's very rare that people are both really, really good programmers and really, really talented musicians. There are people who can do both, but they're very. I don't think there are very many. It's either the one or the other, I think.
I think that's very true,
but to be fair, I'm not trying to claim myself in any of those categories, but I just want to make the distinction. I don't consider myself a programmer at all. I've just learned how to use some music programming languages.
Yeah. I think it's like you must have a better aptitude at it than I do, again, it's just me being impatient as well.
Yeah,
I don't have the patience.
I'm a bit like you, Tony. I've touched all these things as well. I've tried to program in Reactor, Maximus P, Kima, all that stuff, and luckily most of these languages come with or these programs come with very active and very helpful communities that can help you out, and even there's a lot of distribution going on with example patches or instruments built by others that you can modify. So, I mean, if it's just a way to get into these things to get results, it's worth getting into, because you can always find something that sort of does what you were imagining to do with it, that has already been made by somebody else. And if it doesn't do exactly the thing that you do, you can ask for help or have people work with you to modify it, or whatever, or modify it yourself. So even though it can be very daunting, still there is a lot of help around and a lot of ways you can still fiddle around with it and get results out of it without understanding fully what it's doing or how it works, or how the programming works behind it.
Yeah. For me, learning these languages is all project based. So I have to have an idea of what I want to build, and then I try to build it. But the catch is that you kind of have to know the platform at least somewhat to sort of know what it's capable of, and then you can really have the ideas that are where that paradigm or language is good at. That's the right tool for what you want to build. I'm with you, Tony. Like I'm pretty, in a way, I consider myself pretty lazy when it comes to tools. Like I want to do something, I want to use the tool that will get it done the quickest. Often for me, that is software. But it's like I'll turn to making it only if I have searched everywhere and I can't find it, and I really want to explore this particular idea. Then I'll go about trying to make it. But I'm the same way. I mean, I'm pretty I just want the fastest way possible. That's also why I think I go in and out of my love of modular, is that the workflow for me of modular is pretty tough. Like it's, I'm often find myself trying to duplicate things that I can do very quickly in the computer. So for me, it's like using the tool that plays to the strengths of that instrument. So, for modular, it's CV signals and really like having electricity control of these things and being indeterministic and God, what am I trying to say? It's like also like the decoupling of the node on and node off with the pitch. That's just a huge idea right there that modular does automatically, but actually very few software instruments do at all. Like you have to program that. So think, like pitch sequencing is an area that I find very interesting in the modular, but then you find you get trapped in these little areas where you're like, oh, I just need this one little thing that's like you have to spend couple $100 to get this one little thing that that software does so easily. So I think it's just about finding that line for me of when to use a certain tool.
It's helped today though. I think we have things like CV tools that Ableton Live offers.
Yeah.
So you can combine those worlds in a very, very simple way now. I mean, you can literally have the DAW running, connected to a modular, and have the two things speaking very fluidly and fluently, very quickly, without any kind of programming, any setup. Basically, it's literally a cable. I found that really liberating, actually. I realized quite early on that if I'm making work and I feel like I want to, well, if it's a commission work, if somebody's asked me to write something or a remix or production, I probably don't use the modular nearly as much because it's going to take longer to reach the finishing point, So I would tend to use software, and I can wrap myself inside that world and really envelop that, that kind of environment and make this thing happen in a sense. Whereas what I do love about anything outside of the computer is the fact I don't fully understand it. And I don't know whether it's like having two different people speaking different languages who don't really understand each other, trying to have that conversation. And I like that, actually. I like the fact that the tuning may be slightly off. Often, obviously, on software, most times when you open up something, it's perfectly in tune and you have to play with it to alter the tuning. What I love with lots of the things I have is I haven't tuned them. Quite often they're not in tune. And you only realize you tune them to themselves. And then later on you think, maybe I could add something to that after you've removed all the cables and finished it, of course. You can't, because the pitch is slightly off. You're in between notes, in a sense. It's one of those really painful moments. But, there's such a liberating quality with all these kind of technologies. And not that we want to endlessly say we love technology, but I think, there's something... for example, what I've been doing during lockdown is archiving my old tapes. I saw somebody earlier in the conversation here asked how old I am. I'm 56. I was born in 1964. Oh my, you say, what great skin you have. Thank you. And but what's interesting, I have tapes going back from 1976 and 77 because we had a tape recorder at home. We had a Binatone Empress. I know this exactly because I found a tape the other day when I used to record Spider-Man off television before video recorders were around. And during the recording, I say at the end, Binatone Empress tape recorder, and I read all the credits off the tape recorder. So in fact, I've just used that recording in a project that goes out in August on a special podcast. But what's funny is going back and hearing all these tapes, and most of them recorded on this single mono machine where sound can only follow sound. And that's what's really liberating, because in those days, all you could do was record something and then record something after it and then something after it, or reverse it and go and record over something. You couldn't put sounds on top of each other. And it's a very simple thing to say, but it's so easily forgotten because anybody that comes to technology today can suddenly have. And my favorite moment was there was one of those big Apple performance things they do. They're kind of, what are those things called? Where Apple present a new keynote speech. And they had something like Logic they were showing. And they said, you can have 1,000 tracks. And I thought, this is truly a nightmare. And it reminded me of an article I read in this magazine, Sound on Sound, with the band Muse. And they said, on our new record, we're getting back to basics. None of those layering of things. We've only used 300 tracks, 300 channels, of audio on each track. And I thought, 300 channels. I know you've got a separate mic over every part of the drum kit and everything, but 300 tracks, that's not what's getting back to basics. So over the lockdown, what I've been doing is actually digitizing all my archive and going through all the old cassettes, all the 4-track recordings, all the TIAC reel-to-reel recordings I made when I was a teenager. And it's quite wonderful to hear. I don't mean it's great music. I just mean what's interesting is hearing somebody, me as a young boy, trying to make this stuff with the most minimum means and seeing what emerges, and then comparing it to where I am today. And I can't deny that actually it doesn't sound that far away. You think, I've spent my life savings building up a studio, and it sounds like something I did on a mono cassette some 35 plus years ago. It's quite funny in a way, but there's something incredibly rewarding at the same time about hearing this kind of world beyond you, your own recordings from way back. And I mean, you have recordings, you guys, I'm just curious, you have recordings from early on?
Yeah, I've actually done the same thing. Beginning of the quarantine, go through my old CDRs and DAT tapes. I haven't got around doing cassettes yet, but I still have a very big box full of them, and also reel-to-reel tapes. But it's crazy. You forget about things so easily. Things you dismissed at the time and now think they're interesting because I guess you have more distance to it, and even if, I don't know, it's funny.
That actually leads me to another question I'm curious about. Are you guys constantly just recording? So if you sit down at a synth, are you just recording everything?
I am, yeah.
Or are you waiting until like, okay, I'm going to work out a part and this is the thing, and then, is it sort of like you sit down at something, you're working out a part for something, or you're just kind of playing and recording and then figuring out what it is later, or both?
As soon as I'm in the studio, the recording is running.
I'm not. I'm playing around, and then at some point I'll like record a take or whatever it is I'm doing. But Yeah, I was thinking earlier on about how I used to, if I've got a live setup, I used to have it all going into a desk, and I would be kind of like multi-tracking everything, and I kind of stopped doing that. And a lot of the times, I end up working just with a stereo recording of kind of the live thing that I'm doing, and then putting that in the computer and then adding other things to it. That seems to be, maybe that fits with my impatience again. But I don't know.
No, I do the same. I do the same
for
thing.
some
I'm not
reason,
saying that,
I used to split it all up, but I ended up not very often using that. Maybe I do something if I'm using more gear at the same time. I'll have like two stereo. Maybe it's like two setups like synced up, and just record a stereo from one and a stereo from the other, so I can kind of end up discarding one or whatever. But I don't know. It's funny how I've ended up. I'm not really using all the what's there in front of me, and just using it in a much more simple way. And I don't know. When we were talking about mistakes earlier on, so that kind of forces me to use what I've got, and I don't know. That really works for me. That maybe forces my creativity or ingenuity or something when something's not quite right about the take that I've recorded, and I quite enjoy figuring out a way to make it work. And I find that that's kind of quite part of my process, really, just doing things badly and trying to it's like how am I going to dig myself up out? How do I dig myself out of this hole?
Yeah,
I think
know what you're saying.
That's my process, really. It's really imperfect.
Yeah, I understand what you're
Getting
saying.
buried alive.
I have the I have the same thing when I'm playing live. I like to go in directions where I have to kind of rescue myself out of situations which become very dangerous, But and that excites
thrown at you.
Oh yeah. Well, that excites me enough to really work hard to sort of maneuver myself way. Trying to find ways out.
There's something exciting about that.
Absolutely, yeah. I like the danger of it, yeah. But in the studio, that touches up what you just said about not recording everything, and just go with a stereo or a very simple thing committed to tape, and then trying to sort of enhance it or trying to rescue
it.
Yeah, rescue it. It also kind of touches on what Ben was saying in the beginning about the 1979 album. Sometimes you are recording something and doing something unconsciously, or something not really with as an official take, and then you try the official take later and you go back to the initial recording, which in the end is something, because it was spontaneous and completely new when you did it, it kind of survives the whole or translates the idea better than the rehearsed or official take, So that's why I always have the recording on, because I find myself often, if I get to the point where I really understand the piece I'm working on, I'm already at the stage where I should abandon it, And I like the initial idea, the spark, the where the lights go on, like this is amazing, and then you try to mold it into something more structured or more definitive or more finished, and then I often find myself losing the energy of the initial moment. So that's why I usually go back then to the earlier version, and that becomes the final one. The demo syndrome.
So now you just record your whole day or whatever, and now how do you go through and sift through? And
that's the big question.
I remember. Oh, so, I must say, I always do it right when I stop the recording. So let's say if I've recorded 3 hours of stuff, I know the first hour is probably just all nothing. But then I know there were some moments where I got this this magic moment feeling. By skipping through the recording really quickly, I know how to find them, and I just quickly render them out as a small section. And
then you delete the rest.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I never really run out of space, but I don't go back to it. No, so it's there, but it's not really there to be found again or anything.
It's so interesting because
that's a lot of cassettes, isn't it? You're recording.
It's on mini disc.
Hard disk space. yeah.
I asked about that because Robin, what you're talking about your old tapes got me thinking about it, and I've really gotten out of the habit of just recording a lot of sounds, and I'm much like Tony, where I'll leave like a patch up on a synth for a week, and I'll be sequencing, and I know in my head, like, no, it's not quite right. And then I'll just try to do the final sort of recording. And then, so I end up with one recording, but I don't tend to record all of the weeks leading up to that final thing. And this is interesting because I think I used to do that more, where I would just get software or new gear and just experiment, just play and see what happens. And I think now that I'm older and I have a kid and I have more requirements on my time, that I find myself just really exploring or experimenting and just recording it less and less. And it's much more like I'm doing a task and I'm trying to get that task done, which isn't great. I mean, I do want to get back to just playing because it's fun, but it's interesting.
I know, there are different phases you go through with working with different techniques, but at the point I felt really bogged down being kind of just in the computer, and where I had this kind of epiphany and liberation about going more into the hardware realm. That was about rediscovering this idea of playing and having this kind of a slight full circle moment where it's like, wow, it's like I used to do. I'm having fun right now. Wow, I'd forgotten about fun and play, and I heard and there was an interview with Pierre Henry, the music concret composer, and he was talking about the importance of play, and that really resonated as well. And
I think it's key, because I think otherwise, unless this is your job, in the sense you feel like you're going into an office and you have to deliver a certain amount of product by a certain time to make a certain amount of money for someone or for yourself, I think the element of play is absolutely key. I think it's something that often gets forgotten about. I know when every now and then I give a talk at a music college or a university or something, and I speak to students of music and visual arts students, and what I notice is the visual arts students have much more sense of play at times. They have a kind of canvas of work, not necessarily a brush and a canvas, but a space in which to work. Lots of the music students are in a bed sit, sharing with 3 other people, can't really make that much music or anything, and feel like they have to do this thing with their headphones on, and they feel a bit pressured. They're not very happy. And I think, I don't want to sound like a hippie, but there has to be a sense of joy in this, in a way.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's something
you pick up from listening to music. If you listen to a piece of music which has that playfulness, that always comes across.
But even if but I'm not.
I even think playfulness is an aesthetic. It's an important aesthetic. It's not only a thing of a methodical thing, or something to get a result or something. It's actually a desired aesthetic, if you ask me. I mean, but
it was I surprised myself that I realized how much I'd forgotten about that, and it was really nice to. I still have to kind of remind myself, it's that thing about studio time. It's like just enjoying playing with the gear and not thinking, oh, I've got to like do some new music now or something like that, and how productive that actually is. And I discover new sounds and techniques and things that way for sure. But I have to keep kind of consciously reminding myself to do that. So are you shaking your head, Ben, about the play thing?
Oh no, I agree. I was just being funny. I mean, I think I'm kind of like you though, Tony. I've kind of migrated away from the idea of play, and maybe I should go back to the playground.
It's absolutely not time wasted. I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's like remove that pressure of being productive, and just before you know it, you are productive.
And if you're recording, then you'll end up with way more material.
There you go. Yeah, just leave it recording.
Yeah, you'll find something in there.
And then
part of it,
stick it up on Bandcamp.
Part of it for me is that I think I've gotten away from sampling in general, from samples. So, so like amassing a lot of samples that I'm not sure what I'm going to do with is not the sort of mode I'm in. I'm much more in like, okay, I need this thing. Let me figure out how to make that thing. Now I need this. Let me figure out how to make that. More so than like just browsing through my sample folder or something that I've created, But I think maybe have gone too far down the path of just not.
I mean, I'm not really.
There's some amazing stuff in there.
I'm not really, building a sample library. It's more like, kind of having it's like having a live jam that's the length of a whole piece, and then taking this live improvisation and then I don't know, treating it, processing it, adding other things to it, and fleshing it out or not. It's more like that, really.
So you're sort of playing with the form in the very end, but the whole piece, all the elements are already there. You might go through and sort of mess with the form a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it varies, but I don't know. It's surprising what comes out of just playing.
Totally. You guys are inspiring me. I'm going to try to.
I'm curious to ask a question.
Play more.
I'm curious to ask a question to you, which is to all three of you, which is, how often does a piece in its finished state resemble what you imagined it would be to begin with? Do you really think, because I've had this situation where you think, I've got this really interesting idea. If this element and this element go together and it develops into this, rarely does it ever sound like that, of course, I'm just curious what your experience is of that.
I think for me it works in a much more abstract and probably emotional way. I think about like emotionally or psychologically what I'm trying to recreate or provoke. I think that's the kind of level that it works on. I'm not really imagining something on a sonic level, if that makes sense. So I think I can achieve what I set out to do more closely if I'm thinking on a kind of psychological or emotional level. But I don't really imagine things in a literal musical way. So that's kind of how it works. That's how it works for me. And a lot of the time, things change radically along the way, and I'll discover something and that'll really excite me and I'll go off on a tangent with that. So that can, of
course,
that often happens as well.
So, yeah, I have certain kind of distant goals as it comes to aesthetics. They are like things in my head which don't really exist in real life, but they are, I wouldn't say goal, but like an aesthetic, like a certain thing, a direction that I and there are different ones. So there's not one, but they can change all the time as well. But there's a range of things that I'd like to end up with, and it's kind of a desire, but it's not really if it doesn't happen, it's fine too. But I kind of always go into a direction to kind of tweak it and fine tune it in a particular way that appeals to me. And yeah, sometimes I get closer than other times, but it's it's never going to be exactly the way you imagine. But there's definitely a sense of direction, and I'm always trying to push it in that direction. So yes, there is a blueprint, or there is an idea before I start working, but that's far from anything musical or note related or tempo related. It's an aesthetic. It's a desired, a thing, like an undefined thing, but still, for me, it's a clear thing, but I couldn't draw it out or show it to you. You know what I mean? I don't know. It works in a very abstract way.
I mean, these things are quite hard to talk about. Obviously, so
that's why I try to make naturally in sound and not in words, right?
I think that's it. I think some of these things are just they come so naturally. The same way you can't ask writers or painters or most creative people how they make something. There is no system generally. Ben, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when it's for my own music, I'm pretty similar to the other guys in that I think when I know it's successful is when it's resonating with me emotionally and it's getting across the feeling that I wanted to get across. And when it's frustrating, it's when whatever I'm exploring is not doing that for some reason, and I can't quite figure out why. But that's a very abstract goal. I mean, my music, formally or compositionally, is pretty abstract. I will say that the most successful collaboration I've ever done on the flip side was actually for somebody you've worked with, Robin. It was for Wayne McGregor, and I worked with a classical composer named Joby Talbot, and oh, you do know Joby? Oh, great. Joby's a great friend of mine. So the piece was about Charles Darwin's notebooks and was about evolution. It was called Genus. And Wayne, I wonder if it was similar with you. All he said was that no piece should be longer than 3 minutes, and it should be around 45 minutes total. So we, I remember we sat in a park one day and got out a notebook and we said, all right, well, let's give our piece an evolution of its own. So we'll start in this sort of primordial ooze. We'll have static, and then we'll have these voices come out of the static. And then around 3 minutes, the voices will take over, and then you'll hear chords of the, in the voice. And then at 6 minutes, you'll hear the first strings come in, and we mapped this whole thing out, in a graph, and we recorded it and we did it. And we looked back, and I've never done anything like this before, but it was exactly what we set out to do. And I think it was about having really clear directive in the beginning and having it mapped out formally that made it easy to achieve, or not easy, but, made it successful, possible to achieve compositionally. But in my own work, it's much more abstract than that, I think.
I think that's
what about yourself, Robin?
I was thinking, actually, it's a funny story with working again with Wayne McGregor, the choreographer. I worked with him about 10 or 11 times now. We did a piece in 2007, a musical. It's quite a funny story. I was invited to write a musical for children in France. And of course, my first thought was, I'm known for my children's musicals. And I love musicals. And I remember being in France, and the way we worked on it was extraordinary, in a giant theatre in Lyon with about 80 dancers in real time. And I had a room in the back of the theatre set up with a small keyboard, Oxygen keyboard, was it? Like a MIDI keyboard, which plugged into my laptop, and headphones. That was my studio. And every now and then, Wayne would run in and say, we need 3 minutes of pig music. Can you do it? So I'd have to get the microphone on my laptop and go like this, pitch shift it, try and make pig noises, and then write this music. And it was the most extraordinary thing. The funny thing was, it's a similar story to Ben was saying. It was a very defined process. So I was literally responding in real time to writing music. The most perverse thing was at the end of it, there was a premiere in Paris of the work. And it's the only time I've ever really felt like a star. When I was living in London at the time, I took the Eurostar train to Paris for the premiere, went to the premiere, sat in the audience, children jumping on their seats, cheering to this music. The piece finished. I walked on stage, took a bow, went to the after show. Johnny Depp is there with his family when he was married to Vanessa Paradis and all these French pop stars and all kinds of people. And then I go outside. I take the metro to Gare du Nord. I take the Eurostar home. And then when I get home, I'm sitting there at 11 o'clock at night thinking, I've just been in Paris. I've just met these really famous people. No one has any idea who I am. What a perverse evening. But it was interesting because it's one of those pieces that was written in a similar way to you were saying, which was there were passages I had to do. Most times, like you other guys, it's a very organic process. I mean, really, most times I don't record everything. I essentially play and something will suddenly emerge. And I think, wow, this is a really interesting rhythm, a really interesting pulse. Let me put this down. Or maybe I can add something else to it. And often I have maybe 3 takes of something. What I would do with the modular is I can take 8 outputs from the system, so I can have 8 channels, and I've got a 24-track mixer, so I can run things through there. I have other machines I can run with it. But most times, most of my pieces are quite simple. I'm a great reductionist. I tend to always take things away. In fact, there's a piece that until lockdown there was touring called Split, a piece with an Australian choreographer. It's remarkable. She asked me for some music, and often what I've done when I collaborate with people is say, this is the kind of thing I've been working on. So I send some sketches, and I sent this piece that was 2.5 minutes long, and it literally goes dee-dum, 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 and it builds and opens and closes a bit like a flower, just this very simple pulse. And she said, I love it, but can I have it 55 minutes long? And it's only 2.5 minutes long. So literally we just had to loop the piece and spend all these hours looping it and making it so it flowed and just basically putting it through filters so it opened and closed. I thought this is going to be such a boring piece. It's an absolutely extraordinary piece. It does nothing more than this pulse. But you see the piece, it's 2 dancers, 55 minutes long. You can see a video online called Split. Lucy Guerin is the choreographer, and it's a remarkable piece. It won lots of awards. Certainly not for the music, but for the piece itself. And it's what's interesting, it's 2 dancers on stage, and about after 10 or 15 minutes, they tape off the middle of the stage. So half the stage they have to dance on. And then they tape off that half, so it becomes a quarter. And over the course of the 55 minutes, the performance space gets smaller and smaller till at the end, these 2 dancers, one naked, one clothed, are wrapped around one another, whilst this pulse is still going, doo-dum, doo-dum. It's absolutely remarkable. And it was proof to me that sometimes less can really be more. It didn't need anything else. It didn't need suddenly a piano line to take you off somewhere. And the piece came from me literally playing with the modular, or was it something like Reactor, Native Instruments Reactor? It was one of those things. I made this thing and it turned into something else. And it was made purely during play. It was made while I was having fun, and I made this patch and thought, wow, this sounds quite good. Let me record a bit of it. Never did anything with it, but it just lay there as these things do with Joachim's ridiculous hard drive full of music. It sits there, and you suddenly realize, I've got 600 hours of music, or whatever it may be, and suddenly you can draw on this stuff. So again, my process is generally organic. I don't do multi-takes of things. I tend to have the pieces. Most times they're recorded live. Most of my records are almost live recordings in a sense, and most times what I'm doing is taking things away and thinking, that shouldn't have been there. It doesn't need that. Let's see if it can survive. It's like that game of cards, and you have them all, the house of cards, and you pull one out and you see, can it still stand if I take these 2 out? And not cards, Jenga. Jenga. It's like an incredible game of Jenga, and you're pulling these out and seeing what remains, and you've got this incredible structure You've got a structure that works. I can't say incredible. And to me, often that's a successful work when less is definitely saying more. Sorry, I've gone on a long time there.
Real quick, that reminds me, I went to music school at this place called California Institute of the Arts, and I was lucky enough to be there when Morton Subotnick was there. And so I got to take his class where it would be a handful of music students, and then the dean of the dance school would pick a handful of dance students, and it was a class where they would put us together and we would write pieces for dance. And he would always say, similar to working with images or picture or film or anything like that, you don't want to tell the whole story, because the whole story comes together from all of the elements happening. So if the music is so dense or complete that there's no way to enter it, then it won't be as successful as if, there's a way for the other elements to combine and to create the final, versus offering something that is the final, and then they have to figure out how to enter it.
That's true for music which has a applied function, like music for dance or film. But I also feel that it can be a very useful way of thinking about it if it's just for listening, without any, without the need, without the function of accompanying another discipline or whatever. I mean, if you think of music as something that is standing on its own, there's also the other thing that it's living. The other domain it's living in is in the brain of the listener. So it's like, if there is more room for interpretation, it can sometimes get the point across better than if there's no way to get away from it, or to feel the spaces, or to feel the
totally
breaths.
Yeah, I think there's something that reminds me of something, how almost music that's really ambiguous almost can potentially have more magic to it, because people, it's like
fill
people
in the gaps.
they fill it in, and I mean, maybe that another kind of weird tangent, but that reminds me about, I remember when I really loved some music, but like pre-internet or something like that, where it was much harder to find out information about the artist or the band. So I really enjoyed that, how you kind of would almost imagine, crazy wild ideas about this band and who they were and where they recorded and all this kind of thing. And the reality was much more boring, really. So
100%.
Yeah. So, vagueness and ambiguity are pretty powerful, I think.
I used to love that, actually. When I was young, I remember I'd read about a band had an album coming out, and I'd be a fan of it. But obviously, there was no way of hearing any of this. There weren't leaks. There was no internet. And so I remember buying records and looking at the track titles or looking at the lyrics and trying to project how they sounded as I was on the bus going home, thinking, I wonder if this is a slow song or a fast song. It was quite a magical moment, because you are projecting, into these moments. But there's an interesting point, I think, you mentioned about space, and there's always something that interested me. I studied sociology as part of my degree at university, and there's this whole talk of repaired indexicality always fascinates me, which is a great phrase to impress people with at parties.
And say it again. What was that?
What does that mean?
This is great. Repaired indexicality. And it means you're repairing like a broken sentence. So if I was to say to you, you've got hold of the, and you go, oh yeah, I've got it. If you're with two people that know each other really well, there's nothing more painful than like being with a couple that have been together forever. And they have this conversation, you're with them, and you have no idea what they're talking about, because they said, I gave the thing to her, and goes, oh yeah, I got that too. And did you? Yeah, I picked it up earlier. And you have no idea, because they're filling in all the spaces. They're repairing the language. They're repairing the sentences, because to your ear, they're broken, because they're missing the key information. Now, when I was a teenager, there was a Peter Gabriel single that came out. I can't remember which one it was, but it had a lot of trouble with airplay. And there was a Queen single because it had a pause in it. So the song would be going da 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 da, and then go back into it. And they said it was very dangerous for listeners, because the space might make them think there's something wrong with their radio, but also was dangerous for their kind of well-being, because their heart would be kind of going da 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 da, and it would stop. What's interesting, of course, we're now accustomed to the idea of the kind of drop in dance music, and this whole thing, that whole rise, and then this incredible pause. And I think it's quite interesting, that idea of kind of repairing information. It's always fascinated me with music. Again, how much can you take away and still recognize it? And there used to be this thing on TV, I remember this quiz, where people they'd say something like, I'll name that tune in 3 notes. And do you know this? I can't think what.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was
Name that tune.
Name that tune. What a wacky name! And maybe it didn't reach the US or the Netherlands, but it was a funny idea where they'd give you clues. So you had an idea what the piece of music was, and they'd have 10 notes, and you could, if you were really confident, you could say, "I'll name that song in one note," and it would go dum, and you'd say that's Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. But if you weren't really sure, you'd say, "I need 7 notes," so it would go dee 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 dee, and you go, definitely Queen. That's Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody, and you'd win. And I always like this idea of how far, information, how much can you take away and be able to get it. And I used to really enjoy that as a teenager, the show, to see, just to test yourself how much. There's this thing that I'm sorry to rant, but there's a most amazing record by John Oswald, a Canadian artist, called Plexure, Plexure. You can find it online now, and it's an extraordinary record because it plays with recognition of music. So, if you hear a Fleetwood Mac track or a AC/DC track, you kind of instantly recognize, if not the song, the band or the period or whatever it may be. What this guy does is fold all this music on top of one another. So just as you start to recognize that piece of music, just as your brain is going, that's Michael Jackson, it's already the Eurythmics, but it's already the Rolling Stones, but it's already the Beach Boys. And these things are all folding inside one another. No, it's not easy listening. It's 20 minutes long. It's like a history of 20th century music in 20 minutes. It's an absolutely extraordinary piece, but it plays with this whole idea of your brain trying to repair the knowledge it has, if you understand what I mean. So literally, it plays you at like 1 second, 2 seconds of Fleetwood Mac, and you're thinking, but you have no time to acknowledge it because the Queen track's taken over and suddenly the Rod Stewart track and all my favourite artists on one record. But it's an amazing record. John Oswald, really quite extraordinary. It never got in the pop charts and it never will, Yeah.
Also at CalArts, they would do graduation concerts, and one percussionist did name that tune, but on a djembe, the African drum where you could pitch it.
Fantastic.
With their, and anybody that won, he would hand a joint to. So the entire place was just smoke, and he would go doo, 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 and somebody would be like, nothing but a G thing, Snoop Dogg. He'd be like, there you go, and I'm like, what the fuck? How did they? I mean, it was really incredible. Wow. He would play a couple notes on this thing, which was so abstract from actually hearing it and people nailing it. It was impressive and quite fun.
But then I think you realize what an amazing catalogue of music we all have in our heads. I think that's what's really extraordinary, is the ability we have to recall sound. The same way that you can smell something like my father, he died when I was a teenager, but we used to go to motorcycle races. He was a journalist, motorcycle journalist. And so whenever I smell that particular oil smell, I'm immediately taken back to being 14, 15 years old at a bike race. And sound has that incredible ability to capture memories. But our brains are phenomenal at storing this information. There's things you may have forgotten about, and you'll suddenly hear this thing you haven't heard in 20 years. But you know all the words to it as well. It's absolutely remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book by Oliver Sacks that deals with all these things. I think it's called musicology. Also deals with earworms and stuff like that. It's like you said, it's remarkable how the brain works and how music finds sometimes finds its way back into your conscience after 20, 30 years of having completely forgotten about it. It's crazy.
You hear stories about people with Alzheimer's and things who actually, or are locked in their bodies, who as soon as they hear music are able to respond and able to sing along and play the piano, but otherwise once the music finishes they kind of slow down again and are locked in.
Because their memories are attached to the music.
It's really amazing. I think that's the thing I really love about music. It's an incredible connection point. We have here, I can't read them as you can't read them at the same time, but there's lots of people discussing things. And I think, the sense of community and the response with music is quite phenomenal. And it's one thing I've really embraced about digital technologies is those connection lines. So many of us, our paths wouldn't have crossed. We wouldn't have the ability to have these kind of conversations and hopefully be of interest to people, inspire them or whatever it may be. to me, that's a real joy, actually, working with something that has real meaning for people, that actually, touches them and stores memories and tells them stories. I mean, my favorite story I have to say with Joachim is that I was DJing when I had a brief DJ period in the 90s in New York. And it's the only time I've ever been asked to stop playing records because I was playing one of your amazing records from then. I can't remember which one it was, one of these kind of crazy tracks. And the promoter came across and said it was meant to be a drum and bass night. And I didn't really have many drum and bass records. I played things like the very first Square Pusher 12-inch, which is this phenomenal thing which came out on Ambient Soho, the most amazing record ever. And I played one of your tracks and they asked me to stop because they said, this isn't drum and bass and we can't dance to it. And I thought that was fantastic, but I still have that piece of music stored in my head with that story. And the way these two things are connected is just phenomenal, I think.
The other thing, it can work in favor of your imagination, like if you, I mean, for me, it's like I could have heard a track at some party or in walking by a shop or something, and it sparked my imagination in some kind of way, and it kind of gets its own life inside my head, becomes something that I store as a memory or I store as a sonic reference point or something, and then at someday I might retrieve it and do something with it in the studio, just as a starting point or as an aesthetic that I'm after. And it's funny, sometimes that happens when you hear that record years later. It so not resembles what you would think it resembled, so it's kind of gets imprinted in your brain, starts to sort of morph into this thing that that you thought it was but never really was. Like how memories themselves change. If you were in a situation and you think, okay, this guy had a blue coat and a yellow hat or whatever, and then if you think about it like 3 weeks later, it maybe changes again or something. And that happens with impressions of sounds or pieces of music as well. In my mind, at least, you hear something, you get excited about it, it gets implanted, and you use it in some way. But when you hear it back, it sounds terrible. You never thought it could spark this imagination, if you know what I mean. Same with tracks you hear from your childhood. You were thinking some tracks you remember from your childhood, and like, this was the fucking hardest track or the biggest drum sound or whatever, and then you hear it back and it's was that it? Yeah. It's so funny. Some records stand the test of time, but some absolutely don't.
Well, I was going to say I'm of an age when punk was around for the first time. Obviously, the main time in the 70s in the UK, and my memory when I was 12 or 13 years old of this was just noise. I remember being terrified by it because it was just noise. And of course, you listen to it today, and they're kind of quite nice rock songs. Lots of them. I mean, they're very melodic. They're very well arranged. They're pretty neatly produced. But I remember being so shocked. And I remember seeing photographs of punks thinking, they're so dirty, Mum. Look at them. There was nothing, maybe because my mum had fed this idea into my head that they're dirty. I mean, they had a badge on their white shirt. Shocking. You wouldn't dream of doing that when you were 12 years old at my school in London. But it's funny that, whenever I hear this music, I'm always taken back to those times when I was so shocked. But, you're a different age, the sheer volume, like the first concert maybe you went to. The first concert I ever went to was not my choice. My brother wanted to go to it, and it was the American singer Susie Quattro. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. And I'd grown up with music on the radio or at home on the hi-fi system. To be in a concert at the Hammersmith Odeon in London with this woman on stage with a live rock band, it was like I was standing inside an aeroplane, or underneath an aeroplane taking off. I was terrified. It felt so loud. I mean, if I was to project back to that time now, I could probably stand there thinking, what's the problem? This is easy. But it's really interesting, those kind of moments we have in our kind of memories and how they inform us as well, which is what's really important. We are now who we are because of these very moments.
It's like the goalposts keep getting shifted.
Yeah.
About, well, like Joachim was saying about, like hearing a track and think it's the heaviest thing. I've definitely had moments like that. I don't know, hearing some electro track and just being blown away by how heavy the drums are in it when I was a kid. But yeah, it's like a drums arms race or something. But yeah,
I've always loved the idea that when you release music, you're no longer in control. It becomes the world's, and it becomes these memories that people attach to it, and these
it's a second
experiences
life of the same
that
piece.
that they have with
first
it.
life and a second life. Yeah.
I've always loved that. I mean, that's sort of what the name Deru means. It's a root of words like duration and tree, and I love that idea of a tree. When people listen, they have their own memories, and they plant these roots all over the world, and that is what becomes your music. And I have those experiences so deeply of, driving, being on holiday with my parents in Spain and having headphones on and listening to this music I will always associate with looking at the sun go down, on the Spanish coast, or anything, being in the bathroom at Newark and hearing some amazing song in my headphones. I'm like, all right, I'm always going to be in this bathroom when I hear this song. And I absolutely love that. I mean, it actually happened to me recently, where, again, that album 1979, I mean, I created it in this room, this little room. And I created it at a time when I was very stressed out, working really long hours, as my very personal way to relax and decompress. And I was in Japan with my wife, and we walked into our hotel, and there it was, playing in the lobby. And it just blew me away that how removed music becomes from the source of creation once you release it out into the world, and how that can be such a beautiful thing.
Well, you don't do what I did. And I was at a show once in Italy, and I went up to the DJ and I asked him what the record was, and it was one of mine. And I felt so embarrassed because I was asking what it was, and he just held it up, and I thought, it's either shameful or arrogant this is coming across. I just didn't recognize it. But wanker is the term that comes to mind. We would say basically, yeah. I mean, really, like, man, what's this cool record? This is fantastic. It's yours. Oh, yeah, cool. It's tragic, absolutely tragic.
I went up and I asked them, I was like, how are you guys picking the music? Did you know, like, who's picking? I was wondering if they knew I was coming somehow and played it. And they're like, in their sort of broken English, they explained that they just had some long Spotify list that their management creates, and and they said, "Why? Do you like this?" And I was like, "Well, I wrote this." And they're like, oh, "Composer!" And then it was amazing. Anyway,
you got a free breakfast, or
no, discounted the restaurant. Yeah,
I just get to tell this story. It was so cute. I mean, it was very heartwarming. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and you'll always remember that for sure.
Yeah, but what I really remember is the sort of disconnect between again the life of the creation, and the life that it exists afterwards. And the other thing I like is that there's just no way to predict what happens in any capacity, and that's really the joy of all. It's all the ways that it comes back to you in unexpected ways and surprises. That is so sort of magical and enchanting.
I think one of the most, not most, but a very enjoyable aspect is, I'm not sure what it's called in the Netherlands and the US, but we have the PRS statements. I mean, Tony would be familiar with this, the performing rights, and they list where your music has been used. And they always are the most absurd places when they've been used. I remember my favorite one was the Most Evil Men in History TV series. And I thought, perfect, that's really, really where I want to be, the most evil men in history. And it's always quite quirky online. I often like tweeting about it to see what other friends, where their music's appeared. This week I was on something like, or in the recent months, something like the hippies that saved the world. And I think my music is so far away from that, but maybe there was a very depressing, gloomy moment. So they needed something. They're thinking, what's really depressing and gloomy? So that Scanner guy does music, doesn't he? Let's use that. But I always like those moments where you find where somebody's actually used your music And you as Ben was saying, you have no control over where this is going to end up in that sense. Hopefully it won't end up in a big political place in the US and being used there. I doubt that's ever going to happen. But, it is quite rewarding when you suddenly discover where it's been, what journey it's taken when it's left your room, and you've pressed play to send it into the internet place, and it appears there, and then suddenly it appears somewhere else sometime later. Amazing.
Mm-hmm. It's magic.
It is.
I have more questions, but I don't know when we're supposed to wrap this thing up. But we could keep going.
We get paid by the hour, so
yeah. Usually we have a 2 hour.
Popped in.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's up to you guys how long you want to ramble on. But So
maybe should I have one more question and then we'll wrap it up. How do you all think about? I know a lot of you have.
This better be good, Ben.
Oh,
pressure's on.
Yeah.
I know a lot of you have a variety of outputs. In terms of genre or whatever. How do you go about deciding what you're going to do next? Is it you just following your interests and wherever you want to, whatever project you want to work on, you just sort of do that, or does it happen naturally and you just think you'll make something, you don't think, oh, this is for that, or is it a process of play or deliberation? And do you worry and think about your audience and them following along, or is it purely based on their own desires?
It usually works by the process of career suicide, where I'll finally make like a dance record that people really like, and then by the time, I don't know, the problem is the delay in this music coming out, because by the time one project comes out, I'm like 5 projects down the road or something, and people are like, yeah, that's great, we want another one of those, but I'm somewhere else completely by that point. And I've usually got like a completely beatless project lined up to follow up this dance floor smash. So it's
the same, yeah.
Unintentional, but it amuses me as well, the absurdity of how how much you can confuse your audience, like not intentionally, but that's just what seems to happen. But I don't know. So yeah, it's really it's very random what and I don't really plan things very well, and it's pretty random, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. I think I'm the same. I'm aware of the mechanisms of how it works when you do stuff and how audiences can react. So I'm aware of it, but I rarely think about it. To be honest, I don't ever think about it when I'm making music. That's something that comes after when you plan what goes where, and so it's something that is never putting any pressure on me during the creation process.
Yeah.
I used to have a romantic idea that I've been doing this now professionally for about 25 years, and I used to have a notion that when I was more successful, whatever that meant, that I'd have a kind of game plan, that I'd work on 2 or 3 projects a year, whatever this thing may be, I'd be doing these collaborations. There's no game plan. It's a very organic thing. I respond to other people. So someone will write to me, or I meet someone, and we say, why don't we try and do something? And we do it. Sometimes that thing comes out, sometimes it doesn't. And I don't mean that without any sense of ambition. The last time I ever toured, for example, was 2001. I traveled across America. I played 21 concerts. I reached New York at the end of it. I was so exhausted. I was on my own. I was really depressed. And I remember sitting on the steps outside this building, and I bumped into a friend from London, which I found remarkable. And he said to me, how are you doing, mate? What's wrong? You look a bit down. I said, well, here's my story. I've just played these concerts. I should be really ecstatic. I feel really unhappy. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just exhausted. He said, well, why are you doing it? And ever since then, I thought, it's such a good question to ask yourself. Why am I doing that? So I've never toured since then. I play concerts. I don't play so many anymore. I maybe do 4 to 6 a year. That's it. I used to play so many concerts. I remember saying to myself and friends, today's Berlin, tomorrow's Barcelona, the next day's Paris, which sounds fantastic and thrilling, but you end up so spent and you kind of lose track of your own life. And I realized actually my own well-being was most important. So I'm older than you guys. I don't want to sound like your grandfather or your father, but what I realize is your well-being is really important, mental well-being and your health. And being happy, whatever that may mean, whatever you do. And so I decided I have no game plan. I do things that bring me joy. I share them with other people sometimes, but a lot of the time, nobody ever gets to hear any of this stuff.
Yeah, but you're all still here, so
yeah, exactly.
That must be the game plan then, Just,
and I think the most important thing to me is that I share things with people, I enjoy it, they enjoy it, and there is this sense of community. I thrive on being able to stay in touch with people. I have friends here. I saw just now, my friend Greg from New Zealand. Here I am on the other side of the world, but we can stay in touch through this. It's quite difficult to be in New Zealand right now, both economically and geographically. But these technologies bring all of us together. And I don't want to sound like a hippie because my music was in a hippie program, but I think there's something really special about that.
Too much denial there, Robbie.
Yeah, not too much denial. I just got my hair cut. It was incredible before. But it is. I think I'm super enthusiastic. I've never grown cynical about this stuff, technology, music, arts, or anything. I haven't, and I've never let myself get knocked down by it. I try to remain as positive as possible with it.
I relate to that about the. There's still a great joy in for me about discovering music that I didn't know about, and that great thing where suddenly this huge, a whole new universe opens up when you delve into an artist's huge back catalogue that you hadn't previously known about, and that will kind of never stop being an immense joy for me, and performing as well. I know the travel and hours and things really grind you down, but I love that electricity, that animal energy so much about, that we're all sadly completely lacking right now. And
good man. I really miss it.
Yeah, that's so special, and that connection. And to me, it works on this a level of animal electricity, essentially. This excitement, this very primitive, primal energy that you can you can really whip up with music. I just I can't imagine ever getting tired of that. There are things about business and the scene and whatever, and it comes and goes, but the fundamental parts of it are just, I'm as excited now, and that brings me as much joy as it ever did in the beginning.
Bloody hippie. Yeah.
You're trying to get me back now.
Robin and Tony,
my hair is longer than yours. Come on.
Yeah. But you're essentially saying the same, and I think the common thing is the connection you're seeking, and for some it's the live connection with a live audience. For other people, it's more focused on getting the connection in other ways. But I think the connection is very, very important.
It's key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting because for me, I find the most important thing that drives me is self-exploration, more so than the community aspect.
I thought you were going to say money, but that's it.
But I'm sort of still wrapped in that 90s era.
Would you really do this if there was nobody ever listening to your to the stuff, or with the knowledge that it's going to end up in some dustbin?
That would be
whatever?
hard. No, it would be very hard.
It is a form of communication, no matter how you see it.
Absolutely. But I think, I mean, the things that interest me most about music is the process of making it, of exploring and learning and getting better at something. And every day you're a little better, and you're making progress, but it's the process.
That's definitely. Oh, sorry.
I sometimes get bogged down with the idea of, oh, now we need to share every part of this process, or this feeling that like, oh, I'm not sharing enough. I need to, because that stuff takes a lot of time as well. And it's sometimes I do sort of like lament the older paradigms you were talking about, Tony, of like just living in the shadows and releasing very little information and having the music speak for itself.
I think that's up to you. Up to you how much you want to share. Yeah. Maybe it can be a novelty to not share as much. I don't know.
I mean, it's super helpful. It's just a different part of my brain. I feel like exploring is one part, and then communicating what you're exploring is a totally different part. So you kind of have to figure out.
Maybe artists now are being expected to perform all these different roles instead of just creating and performing. They've got to be like a PR person and a
videographer.
And all like
those times when we could just be faceless techno bastards.
Yeah, that's what we like. Faceless techno bastards.
But I don't mean to take it in a slightly less positive way. I felt like we got to a pretty positive place a second ago.
Hallelujah.
Maybe we should wrap it there. It is a magical thing. We're all doing it, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, great. I mean, that was well, thanks for hanging out, guys. Really, really enjoyed the talk. And I must say, I'm so sorry to completely neglect the chat box today. So many people saying,
in our philosophy.
So many people.
I like the real philosophical. It was very philosophical today, and we didn't talk about gear all that much. Really, it was more like processes and things. That was good.
Yeah, it's funny. So people come to this talk to find out what should we use, what is the new synth, and what is the new thing to use, and then people like us coming on the show say it doesn't really matter. It's all about imagination.
More hippie stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, guys, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I have one housekeeping thing to say for people who want to continue chatting to us or to some of us. We have this Discord server set up for all the knob twiddlers out there, and we'll be there after we hang up here. So we can continue discussing some things and hopefully see you there. The link should be in the description of the video. So if you feel like it to hang out for a bit more time, then I'll be there. Maybe some of our other guests will be as well. And thanks to the people who've contributed to the chat room, although we haven't responded to them very well today.
But we still love you all. Yeah,
we love everybody. We love you.
It's an honor to be here with everybody. Thank you.
Good fun again.
Yeah. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Hopefully see you soon sometime, maybe in a different episode, or good luck anyway with what you're doing.
In the real world even.
Yeah. Hopefully soon.
Whatever that
again.
is.
Yeah. All right. Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.